Hello, welcome back to the second part of the video lecture on Walter Benjamin's essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. In the first video lesson, we had discussed sections 1 to 5 of this essay, in which Benjamin makes his most important argument that with technological reproduction, with mechanical reproduction, the work of art begins to lose its aura. So, traditional works of art like painting, sculpture, etc., had an aura because of their genuineness, their authenticity, the fact that they were created by a particular artist at a particular time in history, perhaps for a particular ritualistic purpose, perhaps not. But these were the factors that contributed to the aura of the traditional artwork. And no matter how much you try to reproduce the traditional artwork by traditional means, like copying, the copy would always be inferior to the original because the copy would never have the aura of the original. That was the case for traditional artworks. However, according to Benjamin, with mechanical reproduction, this question of the aura itself completely disappears because the very idea of an original as opposed to a copy is no longer pertinent. He gives the example of photography, and in photography, you know that there is no original photo. When you take a photo, the image of whatever you are trying to represent in that photo gets imprinted on the film negative. Now, here we are talking about traditional photography, film photography. With digital photography, it is even more simple, but let's talk about film photography, in which there is a negative, and if you have the film negative, then you can create as many copies of that photograph as you need through mechanical reproduction, and each of those copies is an original photo. So each of those copies is similar, they are all essentially the same, and they are all of the same quality. So long as you have the apparatus of the camera and the tool that is the film negative, you can create as many copies of that photograph as possible, and there is no original. There are only copies. Each of those copies is like an original in itself, and thus there is no question of the aura of that photograph. Each of those copies have the same aura, or rather lack of aura. These are some of the important points that we have already discussed. Now we will move on to the next few sections, and in this video I will look at sections 6 to 9 of the essay. So in section 6, Benjamin talks a little bit more about photography. Now, if you remember, we talked about cultic value, display value, and use value. So according to Benjamin, in the traditional painting or sculpture or artwork, there is a cultic value that is related to the circumstances in which that artwork was created and how it was experienced by people. So usually it was traditionally artworks were created as part of a religious ritual, and that gives it a certain cultic value or religious value. Later, during the Renaissance, this artworks were made more secular. They were no longer related to religion, but still they had high cultic value because they were associated with the names of the great artists who created them, like Michelangelo, Raphael, Leonardo da Vinci, etc. So they still had cultic value. Along with cultic value, every artwork also has display value, but Benjamin says that the proportion of cultic value to display value is an inverse one. When cultic value is high, display value is low. That is why certain artworks that are considered to be highly cultic religious objects will not be displayed at all to the public, or will be displayed only at certain times, like during a pilgrimage or something. Or you can think of something like the image, the idol of the god in Shabarimala. So if you have to see that idol, you can't just go there. First of all, it is there are certain restrictions. Then you have to undergo a 40-day period of fast. You have to make a long travel. You have to make a pilgrimage. You have to go up to the top of a hill, etc. So there's a long set of arduous tasks that you have to do in order to glimpse that idol. So this is an example of how there are certain art objects with high cultic value which have low display value. But sometimes you can have this image of that same god which is represented on lockets, on rings, on posters, on calendars, etc. And we are using them all over. They still have some cultic value because it is a representation of that particular god, but the display value is much more. So the image of Ayyappa on a locket will have higher display value but lower cultic value than the actual idol of Ayyappa in that shrine inside Shabarimala. So this is the inverse proportion between cultic value and display value. And then as display value increases with mechanical reproduction, Benjamin says that it also gains use value. So we will come to use value later. Right now, let's talk about the display value of a photograph. And in photography, according to Benjamin, display value increases and cultic value is driven back. Cultic value retreats. But that doesn't mean that from the very first photograph onwards, there is no cultic value. Cultic value doesn't disappear in just one single step. Instead, he says that the early photography was mostly portraits. That means there are pictures of human beings. So the human face still retained some cultic value. And he says that the last refuge of the image's cultic value lies in the cult of recalling absent or deceased loves. This means that when we take a photograph of a person who's close to us, maybe a relative, maybe a husband or wife, or maybe somebody, a family member or a friend, and we keep it with us even when that person dies or even when that person goes far away from us, and we can keep it in an album or we can keep it as a photograph and keep looking at it. We can frame it on our wall, and these objects still have cultic value because we see them as sacred. We think that some aspect of that person's soul or that person's personality or the very fact that that person was alive is captured in this photograph, and therefore the early photographs which were portraits of the human face still had some cultic value. And Benjamin says that it is when photographs began to choose objects rather than human portraits that the display value began to completely overcome cultic value. Cultic value completely goes away only when the photographs start to look at landscapes, objects, etc., rather than the human figure or the human face. In this section, Benjamin, so this is the sixth section, and Benjamin gives us the example of the photographs by the French photographer Eugène Atchet. So Eugène Atchet he was famous for taking photographs of empty Parisian streets, the streets of Paris, but empty. There are no human beings. And Benjamin says that these photographs show us the street like a crime scene. The photograph becomes an exhibit in the trial that is history. So it is as if there are no human beings there, so we don't know how to look at that photograph. Now, on the right side of this screen, you can see the image of Eugène Atchet himself. And this is also a photograph. So let's take a look at that first. This is a photo where we see his face and his figure, and that is the first thing that we notice. There are some things behind him. There is a house, a window, something and all is there. But those are not the objects that draw our eyes. Actually, it is the figure of this man, this human being in the foreground of the photo that draws our eyes. So when there is a portrait photo, that is how we immediately look at the person. Now, even if this was a wider photo with a lot of background behind him, with a lot of objects in the background, still our eyes would be automatically drawn to the portrait of this person, to the figure of this person, which is the focus of the photograph. So that is how the portrait photo works. But I will now show you a few photographs of empty streets and buildings by this person, Udayanaanu. And in those, because there are no human beings, there is no clear focus. We don't know where exactly to look because there is no human being. And therefore, Benjamin says the photograph has to be studied like a crime scene, which means that we are looking at it for clues. And another point that Benjamin makes is that traditional artworks call for free floating contemplation. This is a very important point for him. If you go to a museum or a gallery and you look at the artwork, you are supposed to sit and look at it for a long time. You contemplate it, you meditate on it, you reflect on it, and you are lost in its aura. So you lose yourself in the aura of the artwork. That is what the traditional artwork expects from you. But the photograph is not like that. You don't just look at the photograph and revel in its mystique, in its mystery, in its beauty, but rather the photograph unsettles us. So it doesn't make us feel calm and composed as we are supposed to feel when we are contemplating a traditional artwork. Instead, the photograph actually confuses us, especially the photographs of Parisian streets, which I will show you now, because we don't know how to understand those photographs. So we will search it for clues, just like we are a detective and that photograph is a crime scene. And this is a kind of interactivity, because you don't just look at the photograph or you don't just look at the artwork as a distant object. You are forced to interact with it and find meaning from this. And this aspect of interactivity is very important for Benjamin, and he says this is the most important result of technological reproduction. The artworks that are created as a result of technological reproduction have an interactive aspect to them, and we who are looking at those artworks are forced to interact with them. These are some examples of landscapes, Parisian landscapes and streets by Udayanaanu. And you can see in all of them that there are no human beings. There are buildings, there are streets, there are objects like cars and other vehicles, but there are no human beings. And in each of them, we are forced to look at them and try to wonder, what is this place, what is happening here, what is the story behind this place? And we attribute our own meanings to those spaces because there is no human form to automatically attribute meaning. Now, in the next section, Benjamin talks about the relation between film and art, or rather photography and film on the one side and art on the other. So in the 19th century, there was a clash apparently between painting and photography regarding their relative artistic merits. So people, the traditional artists, kept saying that painting is the greatest artwork, that is real artwork, and photography could never be an art form like painting, whereas photographers started to legitimize their own work by saying that no, we are also doing art. So the adherents of painting and photography started clashing by debating the relative artistic merits of their art form. And photography and later film, so the same thing happened with film also. These inspired debates about whether they can be considered art or not. And here Benjamin mentions a few people. Like the first one is the French filmmaker Abel Gance. And Abel Gance compared film to hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics is a pictorial language that was used in ancient Egypt, as you might have studied already. So in hieroglyphics, we use a pictorial language. We use pictures, images to tell a story, to convey a message, etc. Similarly, according to Abel Gance, in film also we use images to convey a certain story or a certain message. So he compares film to hieroglyphics. Then here we can see two other people. On the left side of the screen, you can see the French actor Severin Mar, who, according to Benjamin, compared film, or rather he said that Severin Mar said that film is an art form that is beyond comparison. Like, it is such a great art form. It is so noble, so sublime, so mysterious that it cannot be compared to any other art form. So he is trying to argue, Severin Ma, he's a French actor. So you know that he will have an investment in saying that film is the greatest art form ever. So he's trying to argue that film is greater than any other art form. Not only is it an art, it is greater than any other art. On the right side of the screen, you can see the French screenwriter Alexandre Arnaud. And Arnaud has even compared film to prayer. So he says the way that we talk about film, our appreciation of a film, the way that we sit and watch a film in the darkness, looking at the some kind of a light that is coming from a screen above us, isn't that how we are when we pray? So he even compares film to prayer. And the fourth person that Benjamin mentions in this context is the Austrian writer Franz Werfel. And what Werfel does is he has written a review of the film A Midsummer Night's Dream that was directed by Max Reinhardt in 1935. Now, Midsummer Night's Dream, as you know, is a famous play by Shakespeare. And in this play, the main characters, many of the main characters are fairies and some human beings who get caught in the tricks of the fairies. So they fall asleep in an enchanted forest, and then they begin to be tricked by the fairies. So there are a lot of magical elements in A Midsummer Night's Dream. And here we can see a film still from this 1935 film version of A Midsummer Night's Dream. And Franz Werfel, the writer, was very happy with this film, and he said that, see, this is exactly what a film should be doing. The film realizes its unique potential, its true potential, only when it can express things that are magical or supernatural or something that is beyond the normal life that we see around us. So he says that we think that film is nothing very important. We don't think of it as an artwork because normally films just depict the reality around us. They show us houses, streets, people walking around, trains, all these things. And these are things that we can see around us all the time. And we wonder what is so great about film that it can show us the very same things. But according to Werfel, film realizes its true potential only when it stops showing us these natural normal things and starts showing us things which do not exist in our normal life, like fairies, magic, etc. So these are some of the examples. All these people are Belgans, Severin Mars, Arnaud and Werfel. All these are people who during the 1930s, at the time that Benjamin was writing this essay, they were all trying to argue that film is a very important art form, and they were trying to compare it to all the other art forms. But according to Benjamin, this is not the real question. The real question is not whether film is also an art like other art forms, whether photography is also an art form like painting and other arts, but rather whether with the invention of photography and later film, the very nature of art had undergone a change or not. And according to Benjamin, that is what happens. It is not that film and photography are also art forms just like painting, sculpture, etc. There are some already existing art forms and we have an idea of art, and we also try to include film and photography into that. That is not the point. According to Benjamin, when film and photography come, we have to completely change our understanding of what is art, because these are completely different art forms. These are mechanically reproduced, technologically reproduced artworks, art forms, and they are completely different from the traditional art forms. So the very understanding of art that we have needs to undergo a change. In the 8th section, Benjamin talks about the apparatus. The apparatus basically refers to the set of tools that are used to create an art form or to mediate. So it is basically the machines, tools, etc. And in the case of the photograph or the film, he is referring to the camera. And then later in film, also the projector, but he is more interested in the camera. So while here in this section, in the 8th section, Benjamin compares the artistic performance of the stage actor, the drama actor, the theatre actor, to that of the screen actor or the film actor. And he says that the screen actor is presented through the apparatus. His performance is mediated by the equipment of the camera, because the person acts but when it is a stage actor, he is acting in front of a live audience, and he can actually see the audience and the audience can see him. He is present in front of them at that place at that particular moment of time. But in the case of a screen actor, it is completely different. The audience are not there when he is being shot. When his performance is being shot, only the camera is there, so he's performing not to the audience but to the camera in a particular sense. And later, when his image is projected in front of the audience, he is not there. So at the time of shooting, the audience is not there. At the time of film exhibition, the actor is not there. Now, Benjamin says that there are two consequences to this fact, that it is the camera that has to mediate between the actor and the audience. The first consequence, he says, is that the film becomes a kind of running commentary on the actor's performance, using several features peculiar to the camera like tracking shots, slow motion, close-ups, etc. So unlike in a stage performance, when you have a film performance, it is not necessarily whatever the actor portrays that gets caught on camera, but the cameraman can decide, the camera operator, that is the word that Benjamin uses, the camera operator can decide how to shoot this performance. So the same performance, it can be shot from different camera angles. You can move the camera around the person, you can move it closer to him or far away from him, and you can move the lens in a particular way so as to get close-ups or long shots. You can even use the mechanics of the camera to make his action in slow motion. So the person may be walking in real time in a normal way, but the camera will convert it into slow motion. All this is possible by certain mechanical features of the camera, by technology. And therefore, the camera does not just capture and represent directly the acting of that actor or the performance of that actor. Instead, it comments on it. So this is how the camera comments. Camera comments precisely by changing the performance in certain ways, by inflecting it in certain ways, by adding something like a close-up or a particular kind of a shot or a particular kind of angle, etc. This is the first consequence. The second consequence is that because the screen actor is not performing in front of a live audience, he cannot improvise according to the reactions of the audience. And the audience also sees him as represented by the camera. So the audience does not empathize with this person, but rather it empathizes with the camera. That means if we are the audience, what is shown to us is what the camera shows us, not what the person wants to show us, not what the actor wants to show us. So if a particular actor is acting, he might be acting very well, like his face might be bearing all the necessary emotions, but what if the camera shoots him from behind and only shows us our back, and through that conveys the emotion much better? So sometimes that is what the cameraman and the director decide to do, and in that way what the audience gets to see is not the emotions of the man's face, but rather that image of the man that the camera decides to show us. So the audience empathizes with the camera rather than with the performance of the screen actor. Now this leads to what in the 9th section Benjamin calls the alienation of film. So here he talks about the Italian dramatist Luigi Pirandello. Pirandello was a famous Italian dramatist, and he talks about the alienation suffered by the screen actor, because the screen actor has to act in front of a camera. And the audience is also alienated from his performance, because the audience has to watch the projection of his performance on the screen of the cinema house. In both these cases, the actor performing to the camera and the audience watching the film that is projected to them, both are processes of mediation between human beings and machines, rather than of mediation between human beings, between two different human beings, which is what we have in theatre. So Pirandello, being somebody from the theatre background, from a drama background, he obviously prefers that mediation between human beings. between the actor and the audience, which is live, which is present. That is what he prefers, and he sees this the mediation of a machine in cinema as a negative thing. Now, Benjamin partly accepts this, but he takes it a little further. First thing he points out is that because the screen actor is not present at the time and space in which his performance is enjoyed by the audience, that means that he loses his aura. His body, his performance is mechanically reproduced and circulated. Now, this doesn't mean that only his aura is lost, but the aura of the character that he plays is also lost. So, if you watch Macbeth being presented on a stage, there is a certain aura that is created by the live performance of that actor on stage. But if you watch Macbeth as presented in a film, then that aura is lost, not just for the actor, but also for the character Macbeth, because that character is also presented through mechanical reproduction. Now, again, he says, he talks about a set of things that form screen acting. Because in a theater performance of Macbeth, you have these actors coming on stage and performing for 2 or 3 hours at a time, and the audience watches it all as a whole. So for the actors, it is one whole performance. For the audience also, it is a one whole performance of 2 to 3 hours. But in the cinema, in the case of the cinema, it's very different. For the audience, they may enjoy it as a whole performance. They sit in the theater for 2 hours or 1.5 hours and they can see an entire film. But for the filmmakers and the actors, it is not so. A shot that takes just a minute may take several hours or even days to shoot. There are all these other things like lighting and many other moving the set pieces around, finding the real location. All these things contribute to the film. Another important point that Benjamin makes is that screen acting is barely acting in the theatrical sense. In theater, because the person stands at a distance from the audience, the actor stands at a distance from the audience, the actor has to really enact, he has to perform a lot, like he has to really. That is why now when we see drama or when we see the early films which were made in a dramatic sense, if you see the films in which people like Satyan and Jaya Bharati and Sheila and Prem Nazir all acted, we will find that is not very natural. Like that is what we say. We say that is dramatic, nadagiyam. We say that acting is very dramatic, it is not natural. That is because the nature of acting needed for drama is very different from the nature of acting needed for film. Technically. So the best kind of acting is supposedly in film, the best kind of acting is supposedly when the actor performs as little as possible. And the actor is supposed to behave in as natural a manner as possible. Some of you may remember this Malayalam film called Udayanaanu Thaaram, in which the character played by Mohanlal is a script writer, is a screenwriter, and he keeps saying, you know what Stanislavski said about acting? Acting is not reacting, it is behaving. So that is supposed to be the idea of acting, which is proposed by Konstantin Stanislavski, who was the proponent of something called method acting. So in film, especially in the 30s when Benjamin is writing all this, and even now in realistic film, the best acting is supposed to be when there is very little performance from the actor. So it is not actually the performance of the actor that matters in screen acting. Now, the next point Benjamin makes is that the screen actor's performance is broken up both spatially and temporally due to the constraints of production. So sometimes you might be shooting a rain scene, but the rain will stop, or that the mechanics using rain, the mechanics using which you create artificial rain may not work, and you may have to stop, and then you may have to do it again at a different time, or maybe something goes wrong. All kinds of contingencies can happen in production whereby the shots have to be broken up, and then just for the very sake of film language itself, you might have to take the same scene If an actor is giving a particular dialogue, it may have to be shot from so many different angles. All these result in the actor's performance being broken up. And finally, Benjamin also mentions that even the reactions of the screen actor may not be up to him. He may not decide his reactions. They may be produced by artificial means. So sometimes you get a reaction from the screen actor which is more than or different from what he intended. An example he gives is, if an actor is asked to portray surprise and the director is not happy with the kind of surprised expression that he shows, sometimes the director might trick the actor. Like he might fire a gun behind the actor and suddenly the actor will react with the necessary kind of surprised expression. So all this is possible. So that means that the screen actor is completely alienated from his acting, that it is not what is the final product of his acting performance that we get may not be decided by him at all. It depends on so many other circumstances. And in this context, I want to remind you of another scene from the film Udayanaanu Thaaram, where the character played by Srinivasan, who is a great film star, refuses to act in a certain roles, certain scenes, and the director has to get the reaction from him somehow. So he is called to this house by his co-star played by Bhavana, and they have certain kind of conversation, and that conversation is recorded from far away by the director and the screenwriter, and because of the way that they are talking, they get the right reaction from him. So even by tricking the actor without the knowledge and intention of the actor, a certain reaction is captured from him, it is stolen from him by the screenwriter. Even this is possible in the case of a screen actor. So these are the different ways in which the screen actor's performance differs completely from that of the stage actor. He not only loses his aura, but even the very performance itself is broken up and it is completely controlled by the apparatus, the camera. So I hope these sections were clear to you, and the next video will continue with the next few sections of this essay. Thank you for watching.